short, it's sweet, and it could bankrupt the federal budget. Meet Senate Bill 1046. Welcome back to Beyond the Bill Number, where we get into the legislative weeds so you don't have to. I'm Sarah.
And I'm Stephen. I read the footnotes so you don't have to either.
And today we are cracking open our IssueVoter Bill of the Month, Senate Bill 1046, the No Tax on Overtime Act of 2025. It's short, it's literally one sentence long, but its implications huge, possibly trillion-dollar huge.
That's right. This little line of text could blow a Grand Canyon-sized hole in the federal budget, but it also might put more money in the pockets of overtime workers. So is it relief for the working class or a very expensive campaign promise?
Yes, we've been talking about this and other forms of work a lot, especially because this was something that Trump talked a lot about on the campaign. It's something on a lot of people's minds. There's things about it in the one big beautiful bill that we covered last week. So I think let's just kick it off talking a little bit about the differences between how Americans work and maybe how the rest of the world works. I just want to share something that I laugh at every single year when summer starts. That's a meme that says, an American's out of office. Had an emergency appendectomy. Will be checking email every 2 hours. Sorry for the delayed response, or something like that. And then a European's out of office is, I'm currently on holiday for 3 months. I will delete all of the emails upon my return.
That is a sort of classic situation. So for me, the idea that somebody who's in hospital would possibly be checking emails is like an absolute obscenity. No decent boss in the world would allow that to happen. In Britain, certainly when I was working in the civil service, which is a bit of an extreme example because civil service is very much like that. But certainly if you were to say I'm in hospital and I'm still checking emails, your boss would jump all over you and absolutely say, no, under no circumstances. HR would kill me. So no, do not check your emails. You're off for the next 2 weeks. We'll cover it. We got it covered. But surely that's the right attitude, right? You shouldn't expect people to kill themselves or destroy their health for a job. It's just not worth it. And if you're on holiday, you should be on holiday. You know, it's the same as in the evening. So the watchword here is work-life balance. And that's been a big thing for a long time. We have a work-life balance. And when you're at work, you should be at work. When you're not at work, you shouldn't be checking work emails and things. So I remember one rule that was instituted, and I think this might have been during the pandemic, actually, when there was this view that people were working too hard. But it was when we were all working from home. They instituted this rule that you're not allowed to check your emails after a certain time. So after 6, no one's allowed to check emails because they don't want people working all hours, and they were worried that people working from home, they just keep on working. But I will defend, and I do continue to defend our attitude to work here. The idea that working is just a portion. So if you think about your work day, you have you spend 30% of the day working, 30% of the day sleeping, and then 30% doing something else. And if you factor in weekends, then your work time shrinks to about a quarter, or it should be. That leaves you a big chunk of time to do other things. And what's wrong with that?
It is so interesting, even talking about all of the AI that we've talked about. I know last year we were talking about the 32-hour work week and that we should be giving workers back more time if they're becoming more efficient. It's not just, okay, you cut down these tasks that are a little bit manual, and if you're saving yourself 5 hours now you need to give the company 5 extra hours of whatever, It's not actually that we're expected to necessarily work like that. I do think it's part of the culture here. But what I find happening is people are like, well, if the workload calls for you to work that much and then you decide to do that, who am I to tell you no? But I won't tell you to. And so I think there's this thing where if you want to break your back because you want to, like, by all means, if that's what you want to do. Yeah. And I think that's the biggest issue. You need to be forceful in that. And my job is really good at that. Like, I took a week off a little while ago to work on my house. So I was still at my house. I wasn't having any fun. I was laying floor. And I responded back to something, and my manager was, what are you doing online? And I was, I'm hiding from my house at work, okay? Like, leave me alone. Like, I don't want to lay any more floor. I want to respond to the Slack thread. It's definitely a work culture.
It is strongly cultural.
Yeah.
It is. It's strongly cultural then, and it's not a bad thing because it does mean obviously that America as a country is hugely successful. It's one of the reasons why America has been so hugely successful is because everyone works so hard, and then that Protestant work ethic that's baked into everything. As you say, that idea that if the work needs doing, then you do it, and if that means you have to work extra hours to do it, you do it, and it is sort of expected. And there's a strong sort of parallel obviously with Japan there, and again, Japan was really worried obviously about the number of hours the workers were working. They tried to combat that and they struggled with it
Yeah.
because it is just so deeply ingrained in the culture. And over here we just don't have that, quite the opposite. We're ingrained in the culture. But this has great implications for overtime that we're about to talk about. So overtime here is very carefully delineated. You have a certain number of hours, and if you work over those hours, then you will generally be expected to be paid overtime. But there's going to be some sort of process for recording that. You might have to ask for permission to be able to do overtime, because obviously a company can't just keep paying out overtime without knowing what they're paying. And generally at a more senior level, you tend to do more unpaid overtime, don't you? It's sort of the more senior your role, the more you're expected to be putting in hours above and beyond. Like if you work on minimum wage, I think you've got a strong argument to say, okay, if I work more than the hours I'm supposed to work, then I should get paid extra, and I should probably get paid more than my normal work rate as well. You get time and a half or whatever for doing it. But at a more senior level, no, you're just expected, because you're on a big salary anyway, you're
Right.
expected to just put those hours in. So it's like that a little bit here, but much more that people will be expected to be paid for overtime that they work.
People are kind of willing to suffer for a little while if the paychecks are big enough and you feel like you're learning or pushing yourself. And I think that's a lot of the culture here too, is it's so much towards
Oh yeah.
accomplishment and achievement. And so you're like, well, if it's really
And
bad for one
promotion.
year, that's okay, because look at everything I'm going to learn. And also
Yeah.
hopefully you're getting paid for that. But it's
Yeah,
crazy.
but then the problem is you get promoted, and then in that promoted role, obviously you earn a lot more money, but you're expected to work even harder, and then you get promoted again, you're expected to work even harder. So when does it stop?
Right.
When do you finally achieve the level where you can work a normal work week,
Right.
but you're earning a huge salary? And never, probably in a lot of professions. Imagine you're a lawyer. The more senior you become as a lawyer, the harder you work, the more hours you're expected to
Yeah.
put in, and the more of your time you're expected to give up. And so that's why people burn out, isn't it? And eventually you just get to a point you say, yeah, I'm earning more money, but I've got less and less time to actually spend it. So what's the point? So let's start talking then about Senate Bill 1046. In classic legislative fashion, it's deceptively simple. The bill adds Section 139J to the Internal Revenue Code, which says, verbatim, gross income shall not include overtime compensation required under Section 7 of the Fair Labor Standards Act of 1938. So that just means time and a half wages for non-exempt workers would be tax-free.
Okay, this lines up with President Trump's 2024 campaign promise to eliminate taxes on overtime and some of the provisions in the one big, beautiful bill that we covered last time, right?
Exactly, yes. And at the time of recording this, I think the overtime provisions are still in that big beautiful bill. So we need to wait and see what the Senate come up with. But it is a flagship populist policy. It's the kind of policy you see coming up time and time again when people are looking to sort of win those populist votes. It's pitched as a way to help Americans battling inflation, high rent, and rising cost of living. Representative Russ Fulcher, who introduced the House companion bill, HR 405, said Americans who work overtime should keep more of their paycheck, not less.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds like a really nice bumper sticker, but let's talk numbers. What's the price tag on this?
Well, the Congressional Budget Office says that the current version of this bill would cost about $124 billion over 10 years. But
Okay.
that's a conservative
Oh
estimate.
boy.
The Tax Foundation says that it could range from 680 to $866 billion in income tax losses, or if you factor in payroll taxes and some creative accounting, up to $3.1 trillion over a decade.
$3 trillion.
That's right. And that's not just funny money, those are real potential revenue losses, especially once people start gaming the system. So it illustrates one of the issues with trying to actually count these things. You see that massive range in potential costs. It's because it's very, very difficult to know the implications and how it's going to change people's behavior, in effect, because something like this may make make people take more overtime, may make them take less overtime? How is it going to affect the behavior of employers? Will they start saying, well, if you're not getting paid tax on your overtime, then we can not give you that pay rise next year because you're earning more? So there's all sorts of implications of it that don't come through until you've actually implemented it.
Well, and one of the other things is a lot of the people that are kind of impacted by this might be people that have to work two jobs because the cost of living here is so high and the wages are so low.
Exactly.
And so that would also be interesting because when we were having super low unemployment, they were concerned because there wasn't enough people work all of the different jobs.
You have to bear in mind, of course, that a lot of overtime is in America is just unofficial. So you just work more hours anyway. You don't get paid any extra for that. So you're certainly not going to save anything from this bill. But would there be an expectation that people do more overtime because you're actually getting this tax break because of it?
Or would people start leaving jobs where you're not getting paid for your overtime and start trying to be in jobs where you get paid for your overtime if you're already getting that work?
Well,
so that's interesting.
Which would be a good thing, but obviously that would have an inflationary effect. So
and you probably aren't getting benefits at jobs where you're not getting paid base salary a lot of the times, which means no health insurance here. So, anyways, let's bring us to our favorite legislative cautionary tale, Alabama.
Yes, Alabama. So, as we said then, it's often difficult to measure the impact of measures like this until they've actually been implemented and you've had a little bit of time to see how they actually work in practice. So, Alabama did implement something like this in 2023. The state passed HB 217, which was a state-level overtime tax exemption. Now, at the time, they costed it at $34 million a year, which is reasonably modest.
And spoiler alert, that wasn't right.
No, it absolutely wasn't. In just 9 months, it cost the state $230 million.
Wow.
That's a 600% blowout. And the state admitted afterwards that they had no idea how much overtime was actually being paid. So they had no way of knowing how much it was going to cost.
And yet other states still try to copy them, right?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So I did a bit of a search on Bill Track 50 for bills that are similar to this bill. And in 2025 alone, 43 state bills aim to exempt overtime from taxation in one way or another. So you've got Connecticut's HB 5024. This is the cleanest example. It's a straight up exemption. You've got North Carolina's H11. So this adds exemptions for tips and bonuses too. And Alabama's trying again with HB 467, which actually shows some lessons learned. It's got phased implementation, impact studies, and even special provisions for railway workers.
Interesting. And yet most of these bills are still stuck in committee, right?
Yes, and that's a really interesting thing. Obviously, in America, the vast majority of bills don't pass, but it is notable that as of June, none of these bills have actually made it out of committee, never mind actually become law. It's almost like the fiscal blowout in Alabama made lawmakers a bit nervous. Imagine that.
Let's talk winners and losers. Who actually benefits from these types of policies?
Well, so yes, it's interesting. You can cut it in a variety of different ways. So first off, only about 12% of workers regularly qualify for this FLSA overtime. So the kind of overtime that would actually count for this particular bill. Another 5% get it occasionally. So we're talking about a pretty small slice of the workforce overall.
That seems like an incredibly small percentage for the numbers that we're throwing around. So they must just be working a lot of overtime. And it's not just necessarily the working class base that you would expect, right?
No, exactly. So the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy found that the bottom 60% taxpayers would get about $80 a year from this policy, so not an enormous amount. The top 20%, however, would average about $940. So again, particularly for people earning a lot of money, not a huge amount of money.
Yeah, and also so much for blue collar relief.
This is always pitched as it's the lowest paid workers. It's a great policy for the poorest. So it's a very sort of supposedly a sort of a Democrat friendly policy, if you like, in that it's really aimed at those people who are struggling most. But actually, when you dig into the numbers, it's more like a break for upper middle earners and folks with flexible hours. And the high earners, well, they could restructure compensation to make millions in tax-free overtime by just calling a lot of their hours that they currently work, these hours that people just do anyway. If they call these overtime and restructured, they could avoid paying tax on them.
Right, like that $10 million a year CEO who suddenly decides that he's non-exempt.
Bingo, because I bet that CEO works a lot of hours, and so if he suddenly starts saying, "Well, a chunk of my salary then is overtime," boom, he's not paying any tax.
Yeah, that is a very intriguing aspect of this that it would make me worried.
Yes.
So, I mean, what is the argument for the bill? There has to be a pretty good one.
Yeah, well, I mean, there is, and it's a very compelling argument, actually. So proponents do say that it incentivizes extra work without punishing people for going that extra mile. The American Enterprise Institute argues that overtime is a good proxy for effort. So exempting it from tax could boost labor supply more efficiently than a blanket tax cut would. Effectively, you're incentivizing people to work harder.
The critics also are not holding back.
Well, no, absolutely. So, Doug Holtz-Eakin, who is the former head of the CBO, calls it a zero tax rate on a completely unprincipled definition of income, which is economists speak for, what are you doing?
And the Economic Policy Institute is even more blunt than that. And they said that it is not a pro-worker policy, it's a giveaway to businesses.
Yes, that's right. And they also point out that this contradicts the original spirit of the FLSA, which was meant to actually discourage overtime and spread employment. And that's an interesting thing to note, isn't it? So the law that says you have to pay workers extra for working overtime, it wasn't there so that people could earn more money or work harder. It was actually saying, no, what we want is people working the normal amount of hours. So therefore, if there's more work to be done, you hire more people. That way
Right.
you get more people employed, which is at a time
Right.
when unemployment was quite high.
And that's something that I was thinking about earlier is the whole entire point of overtime kind of being a penalty for a business of getting time and a half to be doing those extra works. It's because you're not supposed to be doing that and we don't want people doing
Yeah.
that. And then if you also factor in, okay, well, if people are more willing to work overtime because they get even more money from it, whatever types of benefits that you might be giving your workers, if you can get some person to work two people, you only have to pay for that one person for whatever that is. So I gotta say, I'm really with the EPI here about it being for
Absolutely.
businesses.
I mean, there's a productivity argument to be made as well. So Germany used to be, I mean, it's not doing very well at the moment, but certainly historically, it's always been a very highly productive country, certainly compared to the UK. So we often compare ourselves to Germany and say, why can't we be more like Germany?
Yeah.
And they manage to have really high productivity, but at the same time, they have the most generous holidays, the most generous leave allowances. They don't work long hours at all. In fact, they're quite evangelical about the idea of not working overtime and not doing more than your hours. And the reason is, of course, that if you work 8 hours, fine. If you then work another 5 hours, that 5 hours you're working overtime, you're not getting the same productivity because
Right.
you're too tired, you're
Right.
burnt out. So a lot of that effort is wasted. Everyone's had experience of this where you try and tackle a problem when you're tired and you can't do it. You come back to it the next morning and boom, the answer's right there because
Right.
your brain is fresh. And so in a lot of ways, you're better off employing a second person who's going to be working normal hours rather than forcing your actual employees to work this overtime. You're not going to get as much from them.
It's interesting because those types of arguments are that's something that they talk about a lot here with even the 4-day work week. You're giving people
Yeah.
more time to rest and recuperate. Those 8 hours are super useful hours, or even if you make them
Yep.
10 hours, it just gets better of the quality that people can provide. But also, I think that so much of what happens in the US when we talk about things like this is the culture and also the way that the country is set up gets
Yeah.
in the way. So, for example, also with COVID being over, a lot of the businesses here are returning to mandated in-person work because they think that you're more productive there, when really doing the commuting, talking to people,
Yeah.
having people there to distract you, taking your
Yeah.
break for lunch, all of these things that you weren't maybe necessarily doing while you're at your house by yourself working, they just don't care about. And it's not necessarily that
Yes.
they're not getting more productivity out of it. It's, oh my gosh, what will we do if all of the buildings in downtown don't need to be filled with people? And will our cities crumble? And all these different types of cultural things that they're kind of getting in the way of actually having a more productive workforce. And you can think about things like that. There's obviously trade-offs to everything. thing, but it's
Absolutely.
yeah.
And it is true. I mean, I've worked from home for many, many years, and it is true that it's easier to slack off if you're at home because no one's watching you. You know, you can just, I'm going to play on my phone for half an hour and no one's going to
Hmm.
notice. Whereas if you're sat at a desk in an office, you can't really do that. But there are ways to mitigate against that. And one of the main ones, of course, making sure that people's jobs are interesting and engaging, and that you're setting people proper deadlines and tasks and things to accomplish. They don't have time
Yep.
to be slacking off. And the advantages, I mean, the advantages that you described are massive about not having to commute and mess around and all of that. But it is a big issue that it will destroy downtowns, and that's what people are worried about. But no, I think you can't hold back progress, can you? I think
Right.
working from home, a lot more flexible working, is definitely the way of the future.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let's end this with some of the practical concerns. We've talked a lot about different ones. So even if this passed, could we actually even implement this?
Yeah, possibly, but it would be a logistical headache to say the
Okay.
least. So you'd need new IRS forms, new employer tracking systems, new compliance rules. State tax codes don't automatically conform, so you get a patchwork mess across states. And if the gaming runs rampant, the cost could explode past even that $3 trillion estimate.
Okay, so we've got a flashy title, a tiny bill, which is definitely a little interesting after our 1,200-page bill last week, and a huge cost like last week's bill as well, and some
Hmm.
very shaky foundations.
Yes, yes, but it is very politically shiny, isn't it?
Mm.
So HR 405 passed the House as part of that broader reconciliation bill, but the Senate version, interestingly, doesn't include it. So Senate Bill 1046 might be the real shot at actually permanent change here.
Okay, what's the final takeaway here?
Well, this isn't about then helping all working Americans. It's a narrow, expensive policy that actually mostly benefits higher earners and invites major economic distortions through this gaming. There are better ways to help struggling families, like, for example, expanding overtime eligibility so that more people are actually getting paid for the overtime they do, or strengthening wage enforcement.
Okay, so in other words, don't be fooled by the name because this bill has real costs and they're hiding beyond that bill number.
Haha, well, that sounds familiar.
Well, thanks for tuning in today. You can read the full issue voter analysis at issuevoter.org and explore the state bills we talked about and read the blog post that we talked about today at billtrack50.com. And don't forget to hit follow, rate, and share beyond the bill number, where we keep it factual, funny, and just a little bit furious.
Catch you next time.